are live.
Ah, we're live. We did it. Welcome, all two of you. Okay, let's do this. So this is not what I'm going to be drawing today, but I was working on a critique a second ago leading up to the live stream, and I figured I could show it to some people real quick. And this hopefully doesn't mind, but this is a student drawing, and basically I was just talking about kind of the length and width of the arms and making sure that this one feels like the big one and this one the small one, because this one's closer, that one's farther away, right? The width of the hip feels narrow compared to the reference, which, I mean, you guys can't see that, but, extended that out, and then really focus on the gesture, the torso, and the legs quite a bit. So that's kind of what the critique was about, just in case anybody is curious what the critiques are like. That's pretty much it. So, but we're going to be drawing a head drawing today. And in fact, I'm going to take this off of here, drop it down here, and get a clean sheet of paper here.
We have a couple people coming in saying hi.
Cool. Welcome and hi. And also, I just realized I don't have the reference on my computer. So I'm going to find that real quick. It shouldn't take too long. Down here in this YouTube folder. That's a weird problem. YouTube. Oh no. Shoot. I may not have put it on here. Oh, nope, I did. Good. Which one are we drawing? That one? That is this one. Yoni head number 4. Okay, sorry, I didn't have my reference set up, but now I do. Okay, so I also just sharpened some pencils. Got a nice sharp pencil all ready to go. And we're going to draw a head. So let's see here. First thing I'm going to do is make sure I'm on screen. That looks about right. So we're going to start with the cranial mass, right? So we want to work from big shapes down to small shapes. I mean, you guys probably hear me say that all the time, but that's the general idea. So we're going to start with the big shape of the head, and to create the big shape, we're going to start with cranial mass, which in his case has a little bit of a tilt to it, right? Like his head's not really leaned back, but just with the way his head is, like his cranial mass, it's almost like his head has like a natural back tilt, kind of like built into it a little bit. It's just something unique to him. Every head you draw is going to be different and require some analysis, and really figuring out like, okay, wait, what is unique about this person? What's their head type? Is it long, round, boxy? I mean, so many different options. And so we'll kind of start with that cranial mass shape, which maybe will sit about like this, and then see if we can find the side plane over here. It's going to come out and down. Right, kind of like that. Notice, not really worrying about where that line ends very much. Right, kind of, it'd be considered drawing through the form or whatever. But looking for just like a nice rhythmical gestural sweep that we can put on there. And then from there, we want to find, again, a nice rhythmical gestural type sweep that's going to go from the back of the head down through the jaw. And he has a pretty tall head type, right? So this is going to kind of sweep way down here. And then the chin's going to be somewhere out here, right? It's going to be somewhere around here. Clean it up as we go. And Those of you that have been in my classes or seen my head drawing live streams, you probably have heard me say that this is like probably one of the hardest parts of the whole thing is getting this shape correct. It's very challenging, you know. So if you have a hard time with it, don't feel too bad about it, because it's something that gave me a really hard time for a long time. And it just takes a ton of practice to get to the point where you can draw these shapes like super accurately. You know, kind of about like that. You know, and then it's not just a generic head shape that you have to draw, but eventually you got to get to the point where you can look and do this, but then get it to conform to different types of heads. You know, some people have longer heads, you know, more narrow heads, taller, wider, whatever. And it's really challenging. You know, it's no joke, right? So then next, right, if we're working from big shapes to small shapes, I can zoom in here a little bit. Oh, shoot. Olivia, where'd you go? Can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Can you switch that back to OBS so I can see it like in real time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, much better. Okay, that's lined up pretty good. That's good. Okay, so next we start breaking this down more, right? And we're going to have kind of like a separation for the back of the jaw and the ear, center line kind of running through here, but that presents a little bit of a challenge, right? Because he has a pretty uniquely shaped head. And so we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that exactly, right? So we can see pretty clearly, like the front of the ear versus the back of the head. We can kind of judge how much space is there and what angle the ear sits at. You know, we can kind of figure that out. You know, it's probably something around there, right? So that kind of gives us that back of the jaw shape. And, but the center line is going to be a bit of a challenge. And I will tell you why right now. And there's different head types, right? And so I'm going to draw this off to the side here a little bit. Oh, let that go all the way off. Let's do it all the way over here. Right? So if we're looking at a head from the side, there's kind of like two main types that I've seen, but then a whole bunch of like combinations of these variations, right? So say we're looking at a head from the side. So that's our cranial mass shape. You get the front plane of the head down this way. Bottom sweeps down this way. Right, so there's our head shape. And now from the side, the separation between the back of the jaw and the front of the ear sits at about the halfway point, roughly. Right, it's going to sit about like that. You know, clean up our construction lines. Right, and then remember, we break the head into thirds. So we would have the hairline kind of just up over the change in plane of the forehead. So the hairline would be like up here. Then we just break this into thirds. I'm just going to take my best guess right now. And I don't know, I mean, we could measure it and get really accurate, but for the purposes of this little explanation, I think this will be fine. Right, so the first type is everything's going to line up on this line. Right, and so say, well, the way it lines up is we're going to have the brow. You know, basically we get the forehead here, right, and then the brow kind of protrudes out and then cuts back in right at that third line, right? Then we get nose that kind of comes out sort of like this, and then again connects back right onto this line that we had running right down here, right? Tooth cylinder, same thing, connects right on that same line. Chin comes out, kind of connects on that same line. You know, we get a head type kind of like that, right? But then what you'll see on a lot of people is something more like this, right? Where, say we have our cranial mass type shape, right? And then we get kind of like our front plane, and this part kind of sweeps down this way. Only now what's going to happen is, what you'll notice is, say we have our thirds again, right? So we get hairline, brow line, nose line, chin. Again, and I know those aren't perfect, but you get the idea. So what will happen is, again, we'll have forehead kind of dropping down here, and then it'll hit the brow, right? Brow bone protrudes out. On some people, that's really subtle. On others, it's very prominent. You know, like on Yoni, he has a pretty prominent brow bone. But what you'll find here then is the nose will sit at a much more extreme angle like this, right? Like much more angled than this one. And then it'll connect back kind of like this, right? And the connection point of the nose will be pushed really far forward of this line, right? On this one, everything kind of lines up on that line. This one, not so much, right? So now we've got this kind of thing. So now our tooth cylinder's way out here. Hang on, that wasn't a great tooth cylinder. Actually, maybe it was fine. Let's keep it. Right, and then the chin's way out here now. Right, kind of like that. But notice that deviates from what would kind of be our center line a bit. And what you'll notice with people, and this isn't everybody, right? Like none of this happens like literally 100% of the time. It's just kind of like generally speaking, is the people where the connection point of the nose and the tooth cylinder of the chin are kind of pushed forward of the center line typically have a jaw, back of the jaw line that sits at a more extreme angle, right? Kind of like that. So rather than this angle, now we're leaning it back even farther. And what that allows to happen is now we still have a regular sized jaw right here, right? Because it's not like their jaw gets longer. It's just this whole section is kind of like shifted forward a little bit, right? And so then, that's basically it. So what makes this tough is his head type is kind of like a little bit of a combination of these two, where the connection point, if we could see him in profile, which I don't think I loaded one of those up, but if we could, he would be more this type of head, but then this would sit at a more extreme angle this way. So like the connection point of the nose sits out really far, but then the chin kind of comes back a little bit more, right? So he's kind of like a little bit of a combination of these two. So then that brings us back to here, right? Which is to say that, what do we do with the center line then? And some people would say, well, you got to curve it, right? And have like a curved center line. But to be honest, I've never gotten that to work. Like it just doesn't work for me because it's hard to know, like, how do you know exactly how much to curve it? I mean, you kind of don't until you're a little ways in. So usually I look for like, how much space do we need for kind of that far eye? Not very much. And then our center line is going to kind of sit back a little bit like this, and it's just going to line up a little bit awkwardly with our chin, right? And then what I'll do is I can just look at the reference and essentially just project that straight line, and I can see kind of that the nose is going to connect out in front of it a little bit and just kind of piece it together based off of that. So that's kind of my thinking in that situation. So if you've ever tried drawing Yoni before and had a really hard time drawing his head, that could be partly why. Okay, so his hairline is going to sit way up here. Right, his hairline sits pretty high up. Right, and then the other thing that makes his head tough to draw is he has a much larger bottom third down here than the top two. So the top 2/3 are going to be pretty equal. Bottom third is going to be larger. And you see that pretty frequently. My head is kind of that way, right? My head works that way, so I don't know, maybe that's... So essentially we'll get these two the same, and then this bottom third like almost like an extra chin length. That's too extreme. Let's make these a little bigger. Pushed it too far. Let's pull this one down a little bit more. Pull this one down a little bit more. Got this section equal to this section, and comes down roughly to about here. That would probably work, right? That gives them like an extra chin's worth of length down here, right? So I think that should work pretty well. And then kind of start breaking things down a little bit farther and saying, okay, let's find maybe some of the, maybe like kind of where the corner of the head's gonna sit. Out here a little bit maybe. right? Maybe break down some of these eye sockets, right? And he has like a very, very kind of small, narrow glabella shape up in here. Right, it's going to sit roughly about like that. Find kind of the inside of this eye socket over in here. And then remember this rounded part here kind of rounds around the corner of the head. It's going to kind of do something like this. Right, and we hit kind of this little flat part over there. His brow bone, again, it's very prominent, and I feel like we can even kind of modify it a little bit to do this. Kind of comes up a little bit, and then over, and then down. Right, up, out, and then kind of back in. Now, is that enough distance here between the end of the eye socket and the, the ear? It might be. I honestly, at this point, not 100% sure, but I think it's close, right? The ear is going to sit back here. His ear kind of naturally sits low. Like you'll usually read, like if you look at Loomis or something, he'll be like, well, the ear sits at even with this middle third. And in this case, we might be looking up at him a little bit, which would drop the ear but a little bit, but not as much as it is here. He just has like a naturally low ear, right? That's going to kind of sit down this way, maybe even lower. It's hard to say, but I don't want to draw too much of that yet because it's probably going to change. Make sure we get this kind of overlap working for the ear. About right. Okay, so we're going to keep going. I'm going to find the angle of the nose here. Which, remember what I was saying, like he has a very small kind of narrow glabella shape. And then the nose comes out at a very specific angle, which we've got to be really careful with. Right, it's going to come out that direction. And now we're going to look and say, okay, the connection point of the nose, remember, it's not going to line up on the center line. I'm just going to look, and it's going to line up like kind of underneath where this eye would be, maybe around there, right? It's going to like shift over a little bit, and the connection point should be right about there. So this part's going to kind of swoop back down and in, and then kind of back up a little bit here. And it's going to sit right about there, right? And then remember, the tooth cylinder projects forward. So already the connection point of the nose is pushed forward to the center line, which means the tooth cylinder shape is going to push even farther forward out here, right? And then the chin's going to be kind of like down there somewhere. So it's interesting because in his case, now you can see if we use a straight line for the center line, not everything lines up on it. And that's partly what makes him challenging to draw. And again, there's people that would say, like, well, you could just use a curved center line and you can perfectly judge it. So it hits this point, and this point. But honestly, I don't know. I find that really hard to do. I find it easier to start with a straight center line and then figure out how things deviate from it, rather than the other way around, rather than the curved center line. That's just me, right? And then we get these eye sockets up in here, kind of like up around this way. This is a tough one. So this kind of cuts around in here, and then it gets overlapped by this eye, right? So if we're coming in here, looking at this, right? This is kind of wrapping around, and the eye's kind of pushing out from under there, kind of like that. And then we're seeing just like a little bit of eyelid or something. Maybe, I don't know. There might be a little too much space right here. We might need to change that a little bit. I could probably even just bring this down a little bit farther. Bring this down a little bit farther. That's probably pretty good. Where does the nose sit? What's the width of the nose? Again, we could use a plumb line. I could say it comes down roughly to about here. Or you can just guess. I mean, it depends on, if you've been doing this for a while, you can probably just guess pretty well. His nose will sit right about there. We'll worry about the actual contour of the nose and all that stuff a little bit later, right? And then we work our way down. And we're seeing some of the cheek right in here, right? We get some cheek kind of swinging around this way, but then it's immediately getting overlapped by beard, right? So now, take the bottom third, we break it into thirds, right? So if we have nose connection point here, chin here, just break this space into even thirds. And that's going to show us exactly where the chin sits, where the mouth sits. Right, can measure real quick, double check. Pretty close. Close enough, I think. It should work. And so his mouth is basically right in this space right here, right? Like the separation between the lips is this line. Or you can think of it as the bottom of the top lip, because if he opens his mouth, then things change, but the bottom of the top lip usually stays in the same place. Depends on the expression. Might not, but it's going to be around here somewhere. All right, kind of sitting like up around here. Our chin sits down here, but that's going to be covered in beard. So I don't know that we need to worry about that too much right this second. But we do need to get a good beard shape on here. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Also, I feel like this nostril moved up a little bit too high. Maybe not. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it just needed to be more round. Okay, too soon to get caught up in that. I'm going to keep going. Okay, so beard now is kind of dropping down this direction. Right, kind of coming from here. Then it pops out and past our cheek over here. Right, it's going to wrap back around this way a little bit. And then down this direction. Notice keeping these lines kind of soft because it's going to be hair. Right, and then we get beard kind of down here, which comes way down below his chin. Kind of focusing on those overlaps. Making sure it reads, kind of add some depth. Same thing here on the other side, right? The rest of the beard is going to come down from over here. Over this way. Basically just drops down this direction. Now we can see a little bit of his lip. I mean, it's in there. It's kind of like a little bit of lip up in there, but it's mostly covered by beard, so we can't see that much of it. So I'm not going to go in there and draw like a exact lip shape. I just need to know that there's a little bit of it showing. Right, and then we get his bottom lip coming out from under the top one. Right, kind of coming out this way. And dropping around there. Right, connection point for the beard. Kind of about here. It's going to come back. Back. This space feels too big to me. I'm going to double check this real quick. This comes up here. I don't know. Maybe it's fine. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Not bad. Okay, so we get that kind of goatee shape on there. And remember now we have kind of like a modified, before I just threw in a line that was kind of like a center line for the tooth cylinder shape, but now we've got kind of like a modified center line where that includes like beard and lip kind of coming back in that way, kind of comes back out this way, you know, back down the beard, and it's, you know, different now. A little more three-dimensional. So now we just kind of connect the dots here for the rest of the beard, right? We can see that it kind of ends up near his ear, kind of up around here. And some glare on my computer screen. I'm just gonna guess. Kind of comes down this way. Rid of some of our ear construction lines there. And then it's gonna pop back out kind of this direction. Like this, because he has like a very, I don't know, like masculine jaw shape where it kind of actually flares out at the back of the jaw. And you can see that in the beard, and then from there, rather than completing that jaw shape and having it kind of flare out that way, instead from there it just turns into beard, right? And so we get this part down under here, and this part just kind of links up to it. You know, and of course it's lengthening his jaw because, you know, the beard's hanging down lower than the jaw. I think that's looking pretty good. Right, this kind of comes down like this. Man, that is like right where there's glare on my laptop. Doesn't help that it's in shadow either. Basically just connects around here, I think. Seems pretty good. Okay, let's get a little bit of neck on here, and then we'll keep moving with the rest of the features. So roughly looking here, and it seems like I made the beard a little bit big, but I don't know. I think it'll work fine. Who's to say how long his beard really is if you can't see the photo? His neck kind of starts underneath the back of his nostril back here. Right, so we're just gonna have a nice little C curve for the neck going that way, and then here we're kind of getting like sternocleidomastoid coming down this direction, right, which is that big neck muscle, and then that's just kind of sweeping into the trapezius back around this way a little bit. You know, so that combined should make another nice C curve right in here, right? And we want two C curves for the neck. Even if it doesn't look that way in a piece of reference, draw it that way first, because it's very easy to accidentally draw like that volcano neck type look. And it is best to avoid that whenever possible. And the two C curves will help you avoid that. Okay, then we get a little bit of tendon kind of coming down this direction. A little bit of trapezius coming down that way. A little bit more trapezius coming down this way. It seems pretty good. It's good enough for now. We don't need to keep going too far. Yeah, so let's keep going with these features. right? So we need to find kind of like the actual opening of the eye socket, right? So when we find that third line, if you recall over here, where that is actually where the brow bone protrudes out the farthest. Although on him, that's actually not entirely, well, maybe it is. I don't know. It's not quite true, but that's kind of how I think of it. But the opening of the eye socket, yeah, sits a little bit lower.
Can I read you a question?
Yes.
So, actually, there's two. One
Okay.
of them is more of a comment, but maybe you'll have a response.
Okay.
So, this first one is from Stephen LeBron, who
Okay.
said that watching you has helped his art.
Cool.
And he also says, I see the mouth more curved to the side view. What do you think?
More curved to the side view. I mean, if he's talking about this, like the mouth being turned more, could be. I mean, to me, when I look at it, seems pretty close. Could maybe argue that we could pull this section in a little bit more, which is partly, I think, why this feels wide, right? Like if we did this, pulled this in just a little bit, might help, but I don't know, then it feels small here. I don't know, I'm not too worried about it right now.
He also said that it reminds him of Kratos from God of War.
Oh yeah, part of the reason for that might be because Eric used to use him as a model for all his Kratos God of War covers that he did. So a lot of them are literally based off of him.
It literally is him.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Okay, so the next question is from Jesse.
Okay.
Who says, hi Brian, do you recommend drawing skulls and where does it fit into learning heads?
Drawing skulls is important. Yeah, they're good for you. I mean, I teach a whole skull drawing class occasionally. I mean, so yeah, it's super helpful. Where that fits in partly is understanding kind of where all these little connection points are, like the connection point of the nose, how the eye sockets work, how the cheekbone works, which I haven't gotten into much yet, but it basically, like there's a rhythm that'll run across here, right? And then there's kind of like this cheekbone shape that sort of like cuts across up into there. And, you know, studying skulls helps with that. Also, skulls are kind of hard to draw, right? Because you're missing all the muscle and fat and, you know, all the things that make a head, all the features. And it just makes you think a lot more about kind of how a head works in the first place. And they're just kind of hard to draw, to be honest. And that can be good for you in a way that, like, you know, challenging yourself is good for you. And it's hard to say, like, do you have to draw skulls to get good at drawing heads? I would say no, probably not. But it's helpful. It's good practice. And I certainly did my share of it, definitely. But do I use that knowledge every time I draw a head? Sometimes, not all the time. Mostly eye socket stuff is really kind of where I think about it most. So I don't know. I don't know if that was a great explanation or not, but I would say if you're interested in drawing heads, then drawing skulls would be good. It's always hard to say. I don't know if it's like totally necessary, but it's how I learned. So it makes me think like, yeah, of course that's a good thing, you know, because I did it. I don't know, like in hindsight, is that totally necessary? Yeah, probably not. I think you could probably do pretty good without it. I think part of it is just like, you know, how far do you want to take your drawings? Like people that spend a lot of time drawing skulls and understanding that underlying structure, you could argue that maybe they get better at drawing heads than some other people. Or maybe not. Okay, so we need to get a nostril in here. going to kind of sit back in here. Right around there, maybe. Still not liking this nostril, like the back part of the nostril. It just doesn't feel quite right. See if we can change it up a little bit here. That, I think, is a little bit better. A little bit more like his nose, but still not perfect, but not terrible. Okay, so you can see we kind of started building these eye socket shapes, and his eyes sit kind of high up in the socket, right? You'll notice some people's eyes kind of sit a little bit lower in that area, some a little bit higher. His are pretty high. I mean, they're tucked up like really close up to the brow bone up here. You know, so usually I throw a line in to just kind of help with aligning the eyes. And then I just kind of look and say like, well, is that lined up in a way where that eye will fit in there properly? Usually what I'm looking at is like, okay, if the tear duct, like I'm imagining this line runs through the tear duct on both eyes. And I don't know, it could sit a little bit higher maybe. Hard to say.
Can I read you a question about this
Yeah.
aspect that you're working on?
Yeah, yeah.
So this is from Ryan Williams, who first asked for tips on getting a likeness, but then also asked, how do you know when the eye socket rhythm goes above the eyebrow thirds line or stays on it?
As far as likeness goes, it just takes a ton of practice. Because to get a likeness, you have to get so familiar with all these like rhythms and construction things that then you can like bend and change them to your will to represent different head types, different features, different whatever it is it needs to be. And when you're first learning, that's like pretty much impossible. And you have to go through a very specific kind of phase a little bit, which I used to always hear, you know, at Watts, they called it like the generic head phase. And it's true, right? Like you got to kind of go through a time where your heads are going to look very generic and the likeness won't quite be there. Like you'll get to the point where you can draw a competent head and you're like, yes, this is proportioned well. It's a human head, but the likeness isn't quite there. And all the heads that you draw kind of look the same. And I mean, I got stuck in that stage for a long, long time. And I think it's something that everybody has to go through pretty much. I don't think there's a way around it. And over time, as you just keep practicing and get better and better and get more familiar with all that construction stuff, pretty soon, and then your dexterity gets better, right? And you start realizing like, oh, wait a minute, there's like this line I can bend depending on the type of brow bone I'm seeing, right? And we can kind of like change things as needed to fit different scenarios. And trying to do that before you've mastered all the basic construction stuff is, again, nearly impossible and very frustrating. But I totally understand that. As far as this up here, so you're asking about bending or like using this line to go up past, or maybe this one, or like when they kind of go up past that third line. I would typically argue that this one right here doesn't go past the third line. Pretty much ever. This one does, right? But mostly that's because I'm trying to create a rhythmical connection between like this section and this section. And then on him, with the way his brow bone works, it just kind of happens to run right along that change in plane in his brow bone. But that's really just kind of coincidental. It's not something I was really focused on. And so there's like different brow types, right? Like some people, let's see where I can draw here. Say we're drawing some eye sockets here. And let's do this. It's like some generic 3/4 eye sockets here. Right, something like that. Depending on the person, like this line is just like a construction line. That's not necessarily the brow bone, you know, kind of like him. Like his brow bone is a shape that doesn't run right along that line. But some people have very, very flat brow bones. Like if you draw Reed, which was the model that I used on a different live stream, on the other male head drawing live stream. If you look at him, like his brow bone is super flat, right? Super, super flat. You know, so I basically constructed about like this. But then what's interesting is on him, the brow bone is also very thick, right? And so when we go to create the inner part here, right, you have to leave like a nice kind of space between this line and this line. And that kind of accounts for like, basically like we're showing here, right? I don't know if you saw the first part of this, but I was talking about how like when we do those thirds, the brow bone kind of comes out and back in, and this is kind of like where that third line goes through, the part where it protrudes out the farthest. But that's not actually the opening of the eye socket, right? The actual opening sits a little bit below that because there's like a thickness to that bone. And so it's actually coming out, right? Our center line would actually be coming out, and then, make sure this is on screen, and then kind of curving back in, and then hitting the opening of the eye socket. You know, same thing here, right? This would kind of come out and back in along the glabella, and then back along the nose. You know, so we have to account for the fact that that has like a thickness to it. Then the problem is some people have very thick brow bones. Some people would have a lot of space here. Other people, not so much, right? And on Yoni, you can see I kind of ran this line all the way up to that line. And that's because his whole brow bone kind of has this big like arc to it. You know, yeah, the eyebrow shoots up this direction and over and gives it kind of a cool look. But the bone itself is very rounded, you know, and on some people that's the case. Like it's a very round bone. And then on other people, it's more like this, where everything's more squared off. And then you just have to be able to look and tell the difference, right? And that's, again, that's where getting likenesses gets really tough, because not only do you have to know how to construct whatever it is you're seeing, but you have to be able to look at a person and analyze what's happening and say, oh, we're dealing with this type of brow bone. It's more rounded, it's thicker, it's thinner. Let's see if I have a skull around here. Here, this is a good thing to look at. Just happen to have this sitting right next to me. Right, so remember the third line, right? This third line that we use for construction, in theory, that should run right through where the eyebrows connect, you know, right in the middle, right? So if we look at it this way, you can see there's like a little flat spot here and a little flat spot here. Those little flat spots are right where the eyebrow starts. There, you can kind of see it there. It's like, you can feel it on yourself. If you feel right where your eyebrow starts, you can usually feel like a little tiny flat spot right there, right? But you'll notice that little flat spot, if it's like right there, you know, like this line would basically run across here, but that doesn't really account for the fact that this is dropping down lower. And then on top of that, there's going to be like a fat pad and all sorts of stuff going on in here, right? So on this person, on this particular skull, I would say like, oh, this person would actually have a pretty rounded line, kind of like him, right? Like how this goes like way up here and basically almost touches this part. We're getting pretty close to that on this skull, right? But not quite. It's like just under it. And so that's partly what makes drawing heads so tough. Is there's just like an infinite amount of variation out there, you know, amongst people and head types. And yeah. And so what's interesting then is obviously this is just a rhythm line, right? Like in reality, this line then is going to kind of come down a little bit and probably connect back up into here and create like more of an eye socket type shape. You know, kind of more like that. You know, and then the eye would kind of drop into this space, ideally. You know, and that's the same thing we're seeing here on him. is now we can add this eye in here.
I have another question to add, Brian.
Okay.
This question is from Yuna. This
Okay.
was a little while ago, but they ask, is this supposed to feel this weird? I feel like I'm just following lines.
Yeah, it's supposed to feel pretty weird. It just depends. I mean, it depends on how much experience you have, I guess. Because when I first started learning this, it felt super weird. So I don't think that's wrong necessarily. You know, until you develop the dexterity and the knowledge base to create something, if you're just trying to follow along and just kind of like, you know, copying what I'm doing, it's a good way to start developing that knowledge base and trying to figure out what's going on and develop the dexterity and the understanding of what I'm doing. But it's not going to feel like you're creating something. You know, it's going to feel a little bit different. So yeah, my answer, it's probably okay that it feels a little weird. Right, and that eye fits right up in this space. And we're considering the fact that, right, we get brow bone up above, and then there's like a little bit of fat pad in here. We're seeing a little bit of the eyelid up above here, right? So making sure that that eye just kind of drops in place just right. But it's tough. Again, like if you're just copying this, you'll be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It goes here, you know? But if you try and do it on your own, it won't work. And again, that's something that I went through for years and years after watching demos and realizing like, oh, wait a minute. It's one thing to watch another person's problem solving and thinking when they're doing this. And it's a whole nother thing to do that problem solving yourself, right? And that's really kind of what it comes down to is, and in fact, that's when one of the reasons like that I run my classes the way that I do is that each week, you know, for each demo, you know, I choose a photo and I do a demo from the photo, but then I give all the students 3 extra photos or more depending on the class, right? But if it's a regular head drawing class, yeah, you'll get the photo I use, but then I give you 3 more, so you get 4 total. The idea is you kind of copy along with me and draw what I drew, but then try to draw the other 3. And immediately you'll realize like, oh, wait a minute, it is way easier to just follow along than it is to actually try to draw one of these on your own. And the reason for that, again, is because there's a big, big difference between just following along with my decision making, which has been developed over, you know, the last decade, versus, you know, suddenly you have to make your own decisions and things aren't going to work quite as well. And you have to start doing it though. No matter how awkward or bad it is, you just got to go for it and start really forcing yourself to try and figure some of that stuff out. There's no other way, unfortunately.
That's another question for you.
Yeah.
This is from Mia.
Okay.
Who asks, do you draw the head constructively? Namely, knowing and understanding the underlying muscles and planes of the face, or is it mainly observational shadow mapping?
No, it's very constructive. The way that I draw, like, yeah, I'm using reference, but the way that I draw is really something more that can be used for invention, ideally, and more like, I don't know, like I started out probably more just kind of copying. And over the years, I came to realize like, yeah, I mean, I can teach that really well, but that's probably not the most useful thing in terms of people wanting to go work, you know, and get jobs and stuff, which ultimately is the goal, I think, for most people. A lot of hobby people too, but eventually I switched to like a much more like constructive, you know, work with basic shapes, move them around in space. And that's kind of what I'm doing with this head, right? Like, I mean, you can see I started with that big shape. I broke it down into planes, right? I found where the front plane is, where the side plane is, right? We get that side plane over here. And it's all constructed in a way that, in theory, if you practice it enough, it should kind of lean towards invention a little bit more, you know? And so then you're kind of putting your own spin on it and putting your own understanding of the head into it a little bit. And then hopefully, if you keep practicing, it should translate reasonably well into head invention or figure invention or whatever. But, you know, when I started out with this stuff, I was more learning like the rhythmical type drawing, I guess. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it was much more Riley based, right? So I went to Watts and they're all about the Riley method, which is good. I mean, it serves a purpose for sure, but that purpose is specifically working from reference. And, you know, the first time I took a figure invention class there and I started trying to do those Riley lines and they were like, no, that's not how you do it. It's totally different. And I was like, well, what the heck? I just spent like the last 3 years learning all this Riley stuff. And then as soon as I take a figure invention class, they're like, oh, none of that applies. And so that bothered me a little bit. And then over the years, I just totally changed up kind of how I draw and made it into like a more constructive type thing. You know, like right now, I'm not copying the shadow shapes at all. I'm literally coming in here and designing out these planes and saying like, we can see that this brow bone comes down, wraps back in this way, right? Back out over this eyelid here, right? Kind of back a little bit around the ball of the eye, out over the lower plane of the eye, down this eyelid, and kind of back down that way. You know, so if you can't find that contour line on there and think more three-dimensionally, then working, you know, in any way other than working from reference is going to be really hard. So I've tried to design my classes accordingly. I will say I drew this eye too big, but I don't know, it doesn't bother me too much. Keep going for now. The other eye kind of comes out here, wraps around, and kind of back in. Sits right over there. You know, but again, I mean, you can see, like, I didn't copy that eye. Like, it looks pretty different. And it's really just based off my own understanding of, you know, how does an eye work? If we have the ball of an eye, you know, maybe looking something like that. We basically have to understand how the lids wrap around it. You know, and what is that going to look like as this wraps around? You know, and you got to be able to kind of like capture that three-dimensional aspect of it, although I'm not liking this one that much. Try this again here. There we go. It's a little better. You know, and develop those three-dimensional forms and think more three-dimensionally. See if you can get that eye to read properly. And sometimes they end up a little bit big. I don't know why. I've always had a tendency to draw eyes a little bit too big. So much so that I kind of accepted it a little bit, which probably isn't great. But seems to be the way it is. Right, get that other one wrapping around. And let's change this up. I'm not liking this shape. Go out a little bit more. Right, we can get a little bit more eyelid on here. Right, show the brow wrapping around. And then we're kind of missing his actual brow bone shape here. I just realized I forgot that. Right, so we get actual bone sticking out here. Kind of like this, and then wrapping back around that way. You know, and then it kind of comes up just a little bit, and then back quite a bit for his head type. See what's going on here. Not bad. That eye is too big. I'm going to try and shrink it just a little bit real quick. If something doesn't work right, you just got to change it. Kind of no other way. Right, then we're kind of looking up into here just a little bit, seeing a little bit of the ball of the eye. You know, then we get the eyelid connecting kind of around that way. I don't know if this is much smaller. Not bad, right? And then they get the iris kind of sitting in here. Again, not quite right. Try it again. As you can see, I mean, it's not like everything I draw goes perfectly all the time. Like, drawing, in a sense, sometimes at least, is really just a series of like correcting mistakes. You know, the other one's kind of back up in here. You know, we should get the eyebrows on there. It's partly why it looks a little bit odd right now. I don't know if that eye's any better. I kind of like the other one I drew more. Not my day for eyes, apparently. Okay, so we get one eyebrow over here, pops up, over, right, kind of wraps around, back in a little bit. Right, so we're going wrapping around the brow bone, if we can. Same thing over here. Start roughly about there. Now maybe in a little bit more. Out, over, down. Sitting around there somewhere.
Can I pass some more questions on to you?
Yeah.
So, this one is from Brickman.
Brickman, welcome back.
Brickman asks, have you ever drawn from the Charles Barg plates?
Yes, I have drawn from the Charles Barg plates. In fact, I have that book sitting right there. I can see it from where I'm sitting. They're really good. I like them. I mean, if you want to learn how to like simplify things and design things in a way that's really nice and simple, they're pretty good. I would recommend them. But at the same time, one of the reasons I don't recommend that book is because it's super expensive. And it's not like you have to have it. You know, I mean, it's good. But I think you can get good at drawing without having that book. But it's cool. It fits my like design sense kind of, the Barg book. Because I like really simple, like nicely designed, minimal line work type things. And from what I understand, I've never actually read it, but I think they're big on like site size type method. And that I don't know about. It's not how I learned, and it's not, I don't know, it doesn't seem like the best way to learn to me. Unless you're really planning on going into fine art and you're going to, you know, take the time to set up, you know, your model and your paper, and like it's just a bunch of work to get set up. And then you kind of like lose the ability to invent things a little bit, I guess. It's more just like based off of observation and like kind of like lining everything up. So I don't know about the whole site size thing, but in terms of just doing studies from those plates, I think it's awesome. I would recommend it. But at the same time, it's pricey. Okay, let's see what we got here. I think that's working okay. Not the best eye I've ever drawn, but it's going to have to do for now. So let's see if we can get some shadows or something on here. Okay, so I don't know, lighten it a little bit. I have the habit of drawing way too dark because it's mostly from doing demos. I mean, I learned to draw through teaching, which is, I think, a little bit unusual. And I don't know, I'm always thinking like, I always remember being a student and like standing in the back row and watching a demo and not being able to see half of it because it was too light. And so as an instructor, I tend to draw pretty dark because I know people need to see what's going on. But then it ends up very dark. Okay, let's see if we can get some shadows on here, right? Maybe we'll start the nose. Well, let's start up at this eye socket. Why not? A nice soft edge up along here. right? Very soft. Zoom in here a little bit. Right, then it kind of cuts down a little bit. And we're trying to develop that nasal bone shape right in here. Basically right up in there, right? And then we also know there's shadow kind of like going all up in here. It needs to connect back up into this eye essentially, right? Like the whole eye is in shadow, right? So the end of the shadow is essentially that little bottom section right there. And then it's going to kind of come out over the eyelid a little bit, maybe down just a little bit. And then we see it kind of pop back up, back down, back up this way, and then it kind of connects out this direction. And we get like a secondary shape on his nose, which kind of makes another shadow out here. Which, I don't know how much we need to get this one on there. I think it'd be fine without it. It kind of sits like out there. You know, shape design is another thing that just takes a ton of practice, right? Like there's a lot of things that are very teachable and a lot of things that just require practice, you know, and shape design is one of those. I mean, I can certainly show people how I would design a shape, but it's tough. Might not be the way that they want to design it. For his actual brow bone up here, right? We have kind of like the flat part of the forehead sitting up here. You know, and his head in this area is very round, right? So this, his whole eye socket all the way up through here has some shadow on it. And then we're going to kind of come back around the brow bone here. And it's tough to say exactly what's in shadow there and what's not. There's kind of like a big rhythm sitting in here. You know, so we're picking up a little bit of shadow along here, connecting back up around there. You know, his head's kind of rolling into shadow back around here a little bit. And this is why getting a nice oval for that side plane is helpful, because this shadow's kind of following that to an extent. Right, kind of coming up and around this way. And then we get that big muscle on the side of the head, which is the temporalis, I think. So it's sort of like coming over, down, and then bulging back out across there. You know, so we're getting like that kind of thing going on the side of his head, which looks a little bit odd, but if you go to render it out and kind of like put all those gradients on there and stuff, I think it would work pretty well. Yeah, seems okay, right? And then we basically get a little bit of light on his eyelid here. Right, so we get a little bit of light here and kind of around here. So a little bit of shadow on this crease right above it. And then shadow kind of up around this direction. So we'll start a little softer, get a little bit more firm, and then even more firm up under here. right? There's just like a little bit of light right in there. You know, and then this whole eye is in shadow. And which means that this little shape that I put in there isn't super relevant. I mostly just put it in because it looks weird not having it unless I'm going to fill everything in and render it. So I kind of put it in for that reason, but so we're not going to have time for that. And then we get a little bit of shadow across here, and then this little section of lid down here has some shadow on it. Pulls back down this direction, back up a little bit. That way. And he's got a little bit of shadow like right in this section, right? So you can kind of decide, do you want to put that in? Do you not want to? You could probably not worry about that and it would be fine. Not sure why I'm putting it in. I think just because I was talking about it. Sitting up there. And then from here, it kind of cuts back across with a nice kind of soft type shadow across that way. And add a bit of thickness in there to that lid. Again, I know it's in shadow and we're not going to see it anyway, but I feel like it needs it. Now, before I get into the cheekbone, I'm not going to just keep following this all the way through, right? I'm going to jump over here, kind of do it section by section, and that cheek is going to be probably the last or one of the last things I do, right? So I'm going to work through this area and then figure out kind of how to work these together a little bit. So we'll drop down to the nose. He's got a very clear shadow pattern on his nose. Kind of running down around this way, back up. You know, and this is where doing a whole bunch of nose studies. Do you know the nose anatomy? Do you know what the alar cartilage is? Do you know how the wing of the nostril works? Do you know what the major and minor alar cartilages are and the difference between them? You know, I mean, do you know how, you know, I mean, you got to know a lot of stuff, essentially, to really get this to read. And yeah, copying will get you reasonably far. I mean, you can get pretty far through copying, but at a certain point, if you want to have like, I don't know, more, I wouldn't say interesting, but stuff that looks like it's your drawing and not just like a copied drawing, then that's kind of where the difference comes in, right? Is understanding all those things. You know, because if you look at the nose I'm drawing here, it doesn't look exactly like his nose. It's close. But it's really kind of based more on my own understanding of noses and how they work. And then I'm just kind of taking that and sort of modifying it and changing it into whatever it needs to be to fit his nose. Also, I know somebody was asking earlier, I can't remember what they asked, but for some reason it just popped in my head that I think they were asking about like constructive methods versus something. And I was talking about figure invention and
Oh, it was Mia, I think.
Mia. But I was going to say part of the reason that we use photo reference to teach rather than just jumping right into like invention is because it gives us like a common goal. You know, like if I'm just teaching an invention class and somebody is like, oh, okay, I invented this thing, I don't know exactly what they're going for. I don't know, you know, how close they are to that, how far off. I can see the obvious stuff, like, okay, you're drawing a human being, so there's some things here that don't make sense, and we can fix that stuff. But trying to teach like a newer type student in like a pure figure invention way is really challenging. And so that's partly why we work from reference, right? Because it gives us like a common goal. And I can see, did you get close to that goal? Did you not get close to it? You know, what is it that's off a little bit and keeping you from reaching the goal of creating this specific likeness? You know, and it reminds me, I don't know, I watch these, I don't know if you know who Adam Savage is, but I watch these videos occasionally on Tested on YouTube. And you know, he always talked about model making in the movie industry and stuff. And people always ask him, you know, what do I put in my portfolio if I want to get into like movie model making? And he'll usually say, like, it can't be anything that like the person looking at the portfolio hasn't seen before. Like you can maybe put a couple things like inventive type things in there, but it needs to be more recreations of known things, right? Like can you make a model of a specific car and make it look exactly like that car? And that tells the person evaluating the portfolio that you have like a very specific skill set. And then if they give you a job and they say, draw this specific thing or build this specific model, you can do it. You know, and so working from reference kind of gives us the same type of goal a little bit, you know, so I know kind of what everybody's going for. And then later, as you get more advanced and you're having, you know, an easy time with the reference and getting pretty good likenesses and things are going, then you can go more into like invention and try to get more creative with things.
Oh, you know who asked a question earlier?
Who?
Jojo.
Oh, Joseph.
I hope he's still here. I'm waiting a while between questions.
Welcome, Joseph. You are still here. Welcome to the live stream, and we're glad you're here.
Hi, Jojo.
Yeah, it's
Okay, Jojo says, howdy. Good to see ya. Finally caught a live stream. Do
cool.
you find any of the drawing skills and training paralleling any of your Olympic sharpshooting skills?
Okay. Not something I thought I was going to talk about, but
revealing Brian's
yeah.
secret talent.
So back when I was in middle school, a long, long time ago, I did Olympic style pistol shooting and got pretty good at it. Won a lot of national and state championships, went to the Junior Olympics a few times, shot in the Oceania Games a few times. And not that anybody cares, but yeah, honestly, it's more like concentration abilities. And maybe dexterity too, because it's a lot of just like steady hand type stuff. And maybe that helped. I don't know. But mostly it was more about concentration and that I think kind of like worked its way into the drawing side. You know, because shooting was a lot like that. Like there were really long competitions. You had to do a whole bunch of shots and you had a certain amount of time to do it. And you had to pace yourself properly. And you know, I had a lot of coaches that taught us like meditation type stuff to kind of help with that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it helped. I'm trying to get some beard type indication on there. This isn't how I would like draw a finished beard, but I'm just trying to indicate hair just so people know what's going on. Okay, so when we get down into this area, right, we have a shadow being cast from the lip and beard down onto the lower lip. It's a little bit awkward, but it's basically running right across here. Right, kind of like that. And it sort of pops back across here. Hits the hair. We have a little sliver of light right down in here. But then this side's pretty much all in shadow, right? So like this is actually going to be a pretty soft edge here, right? Because this is all kind of just rolling into this big shadow. Maybe make this a little bigger. And then the question is, what do we do about that little chunk of hair right here? It always gives me trouble, always. This little part of beard that sits here. Every time I draw it, I always debate about what to do with it. It makes sense, like the side of it might be in shadow. You know, because if you think about it, like it has planes, even though it's hair, right? We're kind of seeing like a little boxy shape right here. Right? Kind of like that. It's like a little tiny box. But it's a very amorphous box because it's actually hair. Right? And so like even the beard has planes. You know, like the beard has like a plane here and like one that comes down and around that way. And it's helpful to think of it that way. So I'm just going to make it so that this little side plane kind of has some shadow on it, and this part doesn't. See if we can make it look a little hair-like, maybe. Just a little bit. Again, like I'm not going to get into like finished hair type stuff. This is more just like quick hair indication. Mostly what I'm doing here is just trying to mark the direction of the hair. So later, if I go back to render it, I kind of know what direction everything's going. Which on a beard, you know, on a mustache, it's kind of obvious. I don't know that you have to do that. But like on somebody's actual hair, which he doesn't have much of, it would be helpful. Okay, so let's see. This kind of comes down across here. Some of this hair kind of coming out this way. And we get shadow kind of down into here, and then I get a little bit of hair like kind of back out in the light here. Just a little bit, and then of course this stuff kind of coming around this way. I don't know, I'm doing something like that. Okay, the rest of the beard's all like in shadow pretty much. So let's find, actually no, let's find the rest of the beard shadow, right? Kind of starts coming around this way a little bit. I want to keep this really soft because it's like a shadow on hair, right? It ends right about there and then kind of comes back around this way. Man, this is hard to say exactly where that shadow is here, but I'm going to say it kind of does this and kind of cuts around this way a little bit. Right, so we're basically just saying like this part's in the light, got a little bit of light up in here, and we've got this part up here in the light. I mean, that's basically it. You know, and then from there we can come in and finally start working on this like cheekbone area, right? So it's going to kind of, it's hard to say. Like we could try to get some of that cheekbone shape in there, but it's more tempted to just kind of ignore that a little bit for now. See if we can just kind of find like a nice rhythm that'll kind of run through here. Again, very soft because the cheekbone is pretty rounded. Depends on the person, I guess, a little bit. But on him, I would keep this pretty soft. And then in here, it kind of like changes direction just a little bit. You know, and then this does kind of come out this way, but I would put this more in later as like a rendering thing and add it more as like a dark halftone maybe, where that little bit of cheekbone pops out there. Don't know that I would put it in right this second. Then, all we're kind of missing here, oh, whoa, that was too fast. It's kind of like, well, the ear first off, but we'll maybe come back to that in a second. And maybe we'll find basically where the shadow ends down here, right? Because we want to draw like complete shapes. If we're drawing shadows and shadow shapes, even halftone shapes, right? We always want complete shapes. And so you can see each one of these little shapes I'm drawing, even though it's really big, it basically makes like a big complete shape, right? Like this makes a big shape all the way around, right? This bit of shadow comes all the way around and makes a big shape, right? But the problem we have right now is this shadow goes all the way up around here. There's no bottom part, right? So we got to make sure that we complete that and figure out where that shadow is being cast then down onto his shoulders down here, right? And I think one thing we can do is make this shoulder a little bigger. Kind of link that shape into that part of his trapezius back here, and then use some plumb lines, right? So it drops down kind of roughly about where this part of his ear is. So it's going to come up over the trapezius, back down the trapezius, across that little kind of like indentation created between the collarbone and the trapezius. Then we hit some collarbone. Right about in there. And then it kind of goes over the collarbone. Kind of comes down this way. Right? It's being cast pretty far. But you can see I'm, again, not really copying. If you look at what I'm drawing versus what's in the reference, it's not like an exact duplicate by any means. I'm using more like my knowledge of like, how does a trapezius work? How does it connect to the collarbone? How does the collarbone sit there? You know, and trying to kind of design it a little bit. You know, it comes down past the pit of the neck. It comes down pretty far. And then this part sweeps in here, maybe comes out a little bit. It's a little ambiguous what's happening right in there, but I think this will work fine. Keep that nice and soft. Notice varying my edges. If we get into shadow mapping, right, edge variation is a big part of it, right? So I have this kind of edge, They're really soft, back to a little bit harder where it's hitting the collarbone, you know, and then working its way back to really soft again down in here where it's really far away from the head. You know, nice soft edge out here. Always looking for that variation as much as possible. Not bad. Eye still bothers me a little bit, but I think I can live with it. Okay, so let's talk about the ear a little bit. Right, one thing we can do with the ear is break it into thirds. Kind of like that. I don't know that those are perfect thirds, but they're pretty close. Oh, okay, nailed it. Got lucky. Right, and so what's going to happen is, you know, again, you can copy, you could, but it probably won't look as good as it could if you were really familiar with ear anatomy, right? And understand that we've got like the helix, and then inside there sits the antihelix, which at the top part of it is like the triangular fossa, which basically sits in this space. And then our antihelix is going to kind of come around this way. And then we get the tragus, right, which is like the little flappy part kind of sitting right here in this middle third. And then we get the notch. It's a weird name, but if you look it up, a lot of them just say notch, and it's a notch. Right, so tragus sitting here. Our helix comes up and over. Back around here. And then it starts to come back this direction. And then we hit kind of this little flat part, and then it kind of connects back up. Right, so we're going to have, again, in this area is where that little triangular fossa part is going to sit. And also our helix. Wrapping around this way. Right, so that helix goes all the way around. It'll look different on different people, right? So I mean, again, that brings us back to, do you know this stuff well enough that you can kind of modify it and change it depending on the circumstance? Right, so the helix wraps up around here. Our antihelix is going to come back in here, kind of wrap back around this way and sort of link into here, right? And then we get that little triangular fossa section, which has like that little, I don't know, little Y-type shape, basically, right? Kind of like that. And then it's going to kind of follow this back out here. And it's going to pop back in this way. Right, sits right about there. And then this has some depth to it, right? So we're actually kind of seeing like a little bit of this part popping out here, kind of connecting back in here, right? Like it actually has depth, right? Like this is a three-dimensional thing where we can actually see if we had a contour line, it would sort of wrap around like that way, right? Like we're actually building a three-dimensional object, you know, kind of like that. And then inside here, there's this like kind of depression, right, which is called the concha. Also, it's a little picky, but technically the tragus, right, which is the little flappy part here, there's the tragus, and then this little part over here, the other flap on the other side is called the antitragus, right? Technically it has these two bumps on it, but you can't see that from every angle. And personally, I think it just looks a little bit odd in a drawing, right? So I usually just kind of smooth it out. Right? Then once we get all our parts on here, then we can come in and start figuring out how the light is sitting on there. And honestly, there's not much. It's just a little bit of light here, right? So get kind of a soft edge here, kind of a soft edge back around here. And then we're getting a little bit of light up on the ridge right here. Just ever so slightly. You know, a strip of light right in there, and then that kind of just stops down here. And then there's a little bit on here. Lighten that a little bit. That's probably fine, right? So essentially a little bit of light there, a little bit of light there, and kind of merges up into here a little bit. Nothing too complicated. Assuming you know your ear anatomy. If you don't, then it might actually be a little bit complicated. Cool. So that would be the ear. Right? We can kind of put the rest of this head on here, maybe lock it down a little bit better. It's going around that way. We get this part. Swooping up over that way a little bit. The rest of it looks pretty good. Yeah, not bad. I think it'll do. yeah, anyway, that's pretty much it. You know, maybe come out here, refine some of these shapes a little bit, but overall I feel like it's working reasonably well. There's a little bit of light on this part of his beard. Like right in there. Just a little bit. We're picking up just a little bit of like hair. It's very subtle, but picking up a little bit of light.
A couple questions, Brian.
Sure.
This one is from a little earlier from Isaiah.
Okay, Isaiah, welcome back.
Isaiah asks, how often do you hit a streak where you're in the zone and cracking out drawings?
That's a good question. I mean, more often than I used to, that's for sure. I mean, with the way that I draw now, like in terms of teaching all these classes and stuff, I usually go through periods where, you know, like when classes are running, I'll be doing a ton of drawings. I mean, I'm filming a demo almost every day and filming, you know, critique videos, depending on how many people are in the class. I mean, I might be filming, I don't know, anywhere from 1 all the way up to 10 critiques in like a day. And you know, I take them pretty far. That's one of the things that got me in trouble in my old job was I spent a lot of time on them. And it's very time consuming. But you can see the one I just drew just before starting the live stream, right? Like I was doing a critique. Looked kind of like this. You know, so in terms of this type of stuff, I do a lot, right? Student drawing. And then I kind of went over and talked about, you know, we got to bring this hip out, find this boxy shape and kind of design the hip accordingly. You know, adjust the perspective on the legs so it reads a little bit better. And then try and find like a nice rhythmical flow. So, I mean, I'm doing that stuff all day long during the term. And then usually we have a break. And then like with the way the classes work, you know, like usually I don't do critiques during the first week because it's all demos. And then I start working on critiques like in the second week and work on those a whole bunch. And then the term ends after 5 weeks, but then I have another week's worth of critiques to do. So we have like a 3-week break between classes, but I get more like a 2-week break because I usually keep working on critiques to get them done during that first week of the break. And then I get a couple weeks off. And then to be honest, I don't draw much during those couple weeks off. I just kind of take some time off, which in a way is bad because you get rusty quick if you're not drawing like all the time. But at the same time, with the way I run my classes, the first week's demos are usually more constructive and I'm not doing like high level rendering. And so it gives me a chance to kind of get warmed back up a little bit. And then, yeah, so I draw a lot is really what it comes down to. And I've been doing this for a long time now. You know, I've been teaching for almost 10 years, maybe 9 years. It's hard to say because when I started this school, I think I calculated that I had been teaching for about 7 years. And we've been doing this now for about 2 years, so probably 9 years. And then like I was a student, you know, at Watts for probably a good 3 years before that, before I started teaching. And so to answer your question, I draw a lot. I mean, that's to get really good at this stuff, you just got to do it a lot, you know. And the people that tend to get really good at it are the people that just like to draw, right? Regardless of whether they're good at it or not. They just enjoy the art and the act of sitting down and just working on a drawing. And it's a lot of like problem solving, and it's like kind of hard work, you know, but there's certain types of people that just like doing it, you know, and every now and then something turns out good and you're like, oh, wow, I actually did it that time. And, you know, it kind of motivates you to keep going. But the truth is, for those first like 3 years or so, like my drawings were horrible. They were really bad. And, but I didn't really care. I liked, and fortunately, like I had the opportunity to take in-person classes at Watts, right? So like, I just kind of like going there and sitting down and focusing on something for 3 hours and trying to figure things out, right? And doing that problem solving and trying to figure out why things weren't working, why they were. And, yeah, I don't know. And eventually you just kind of start figuring it out. It certainly helps to have good instructors. I mean, I was fortunate enough that I had super good instructors, and you get to like see their problem solving and the type of thinking they have going into things, and you try and mimic it. And over time, eventually you get to the point where you're doing that on your own and showing other people how to do it. But yeah, I forget what the question was. Was it just how much I draw? I think that was it.
Did you get into like a groove basically?
Oh, that's right. How often do I get into a groove?
Hit a streak.
Hit a streak?
This is a really long answer for this question.
Yeah, it is. Pretty often. That's the answer. Yeah.
I'm going to give you a different question.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to give you a question from Ajax.
Okay. Ajax, welcome.
And this says here, when you make a mark or shade, do you only do strokes in one direction, or do you go back and forth?
I only go in one direction, but it depends on the materials that you're using and what effect you want. But for the materials I'm using, like this charcoal pencil on smooth newsprint, when I'm like doing mark making, especially like with the shadow mapping and stuff, it's all in the same direction, right? It goes like downstroke, down, 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 and you just kind of stack them up, right? Or if I want to make like a softer type edge, right? It's all like this way, this way, this way. It's all in the same direction. And I don't know, with the way that I was trained and taught, like for learning purposes, we would always use, you know, just one charcoal pencil and smooth newsprint, and all this variation that you get just comes through pressure sensitivity. And it's a hard way to learn, but at the same time, if you take the time to do it, it really builds dexterity like a lot and pretty quickly, you know. But I would say all the same direction. Even in graphite, I feel like I would go mostly the same direction, you know. And yeah. I will say there are times every now and then where I'll go back and forth a little bit, but it's pretty rare, and I probably shouldn't do it. Are more questions or no? Because if not, then I'm kind of done.
Let's see. I think there might be one more. Oh yeah, there is one more. This is from Mia again.
Ah, Mia.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Mia says, awesome work. Do you actively use the Asaro head in your drawing?
Depends on what you mean by actively. Like, do I ever get it out and look at it while I'm working on a drawing? No. Have I studied it and drawn it many times? Yes, definitely. And I teach it. In fact, it's usually a part of my fundamental head drawing class is we'll have a week where we draw the Asaro head. And there's, honestly, it's hard to draw. The proportions of it are a little bit awkward, and there's things about it I like and things about it I don't like, some of which I use quite a bit in my drawings, like especially like in the cheekbone area, the planes of the eye, right? The way that the eye is broken down in the Asaro head is super helpful. The planes of the nose can be pretty helpful. The rest of it, if I'm being honest, I kind of ignore it. And when I draw it nowadays, I used to try and copy it exactly how it is. And nowadays, I actually draw like a modified version of it for my demos that make it conform more to the typical proportions that I teach and the brow construction, you know, because it has like this like strange, like big flat spot in the middle of the forehead. Sorry, it's sitting up here. I can see it. In fact, I can even show you guys. Sorry, you're going to have to watch me stand up for a second. Haha, there we go. So you can see it here. Boom, Asaro head, right? And so there's like this huge flat spot here. And so I'm guessing, and you kind of see that when Bridgman draws heads. What is that? He kind of has like a similar big flat spot. So I'm guessing the Asaro head is a little bit based off of like the Bridgman head. But to me, the glabella shape, like that little keystone shape that we typically draw, sits like right about here, but it's so low. It's, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say like nobody's head works this way. Obviously, this looks like it could be a real person, but it's not the way that I typically break a head down, specifically in this area. So when I do the demo, I would actually change it and show more like the thirds and like the way I typically break down eye sockets and the glabella and stuff like that. The mouth is helpful, but the thing that I find most helpful on this thing is like this area in here. That had a pretty big influence on me. The way the cheekbone is constructed, the way the corner of the brow is constructed and the eye, the planes of the nose kind of right up in here can be pretty helpful. The mouth and chin, it's a little bit odd. Like it seems like he has like a second mouth down here almost. But in terms of like planes, it actually does kind of make sense. So yeah, I mean, I've certainly studied this thing. And there's parts of it I like, parts I don't. And I use the ones I like. That's kind of most of the way that I draw is like, you know, I learned Riley method stuff for years at Watts as a student. And as I got more and more into it and more advanced, I started realizing like, you know what, there's things about it I like, and there's some things that I kind of disagree with and want to do differently. And so like the way I draw now is kind of like a modified version of all sorts of things, right? There's a little bit of Loomis, a little bit of Riley, a little bit of my own ideas, right? Like I've come up with some stuff that I've never seen in a book or anywhere in terms of head construction. And, yeah, I don't know.
There's one more question for you.
Okay.
This is... Oh, there's two more questions.
Two more questions.
Yeah, people are getting their questions.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this one's from Isaiah, who
Isaiah.
asks,
Yeah.
on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your perfectionist threshold? Or how have you found the balance between calling a drawing or working on it until you get it to your desired point?
Oh, well, that's easy. I don't know about a scale of 1 to 10. That'd be hard to say. But certainly when I first started out, I was way more perfectionist oriented. And I was like, you know, you really struggle and you're like, God, it's all got to be in the right spot. And you're like really trying to make it happen. And what's weird is as you get more and more advanced, like you realize there's actually kind of some wiggle room in some of this stuff, right? Like, do the eyes have to be like literally placed totally perfectly? Like if I took these eyes and shifted them down just a little tiny bit, it probably wouldn't matter a whole lot. Now, if you go too far, then yeah, it doesn't work anymore. But there's a little bit of wiggle room. Did I tilt this ear perfectly? Maybe not, but it's pretty dang close that it works, you know? And so what I've learned is like to be actually less perfectionist. But what's weird is that only works once you start getting more advanced and you've been doing this for a long time. Because like at first, it's almost like you have to be really perfectionist to the point where you can actually do it pretty perfectly. And then you can kind of start to loosen up and do things a little bit differently and take your time with things and move things around and see what happens. And yeah, I don't know. But on a scale of 1 to 10, let's see. At this point, I would say I'm more like a 6 or a 7, but I probably used to be a 10. Maybe I'm a 5. I don't know. I don't know. But nowadays, what I'm into is not copying the reference. I just try and design a head that looks the way I want it to look in terms of like how the drawing works. And then, I don't know, I'm not really like trying to copy things so much. I'm trying to capture the likeness. And, you know, you got to have the right proportions. But that's more what I'm looking to the reference for. Like likeness and lighting is the other one, right? Because I'm kind of basing the lighting and looking at the lighting in the reference. But aside from that, I'm mostly just constructing a head that resembles the model rather than trying to copy the photo, you know? Yeah, I don't know. That's my answer. I don't know about the 1 to 10 scale. That's too complicated.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
This is from Celsius.
Celsius, welcome back.
Celsius says, "Hi guys, bat emoji."
Hello. Bat emoji to you as well.
He says, "You mentioned in a past stream about finishing drawings and fully rendering them
Oh yeah.
by, gosh, always, there's like this heart button in front of the comment. Let me see
Oh.
what it says there. Sorry, hang on one second.
I'm getting
I can't
something
see
used
the
to
comment
it.
because YouTube's thing is weird.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
I can see
I'm
it in
gonna
here.
guess that word is "and." Okay, I'm gonna restart reading this.
Okay.
Sorry, Celsius. YouTube is blocking
Celsius,
your comment.
we have
Okay.
wrecked your comment.
I'm just gonna guess at that missing
Yeah.
word. Okay, it says you mentioned in a past stream about finishing drawings and fully rendering them and getting used to it. Was that right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to render some stuff. I guess it depends on what you want to do with this stuff long term. But if you want to be able to render drawings, the only way to do that is to render drawings. If you're asking about these live streams, because I know at one point I mentioned that I might go take things farther, but the problem is I'm not super fast, and talking and answering questions slows me down even more. So like, I would end up with like a partially rendered thing, I feel like, or my option is draw this part ahead of time and then start the live stream from here, and then it would just be like a rendering live stream, which I've been thinking about doing. I just haven't had time to get it set up yet. But if you're asking like for, you know, for learning purposes, should you be rendering stuff? Yeah, I mean, you got to do a little bit of both, right? So like I always tell people to approach training drawing as though you were at like an actual school, right? And so like if you were going to Watts, like I did, there would be a bunch of different classes, right? You'd have your head drawing classes, your figure drawing classes. In those classes, you would be taking things as far as you can. You'd probably try and bring them up to a fully rendered, finished state, right? Then you would have like your 20-minute head drawing and your 20-minute figure drawing classes. The whole point of those is to try and get to like this point, but in 20 minutes, right? Now, obviously, this took me a lot longer than 20 minutes, but that's mostly because I'm talking and explaining things. And, you know, so you'd be doing those. Then on top of that, you'd be doing probably head and figure quick sketch, right? Where you're doing like little like 3 and 5 minute type drawings and putting down just like minimal line work to try and get things to read. And so you'd be doing all of that, right? And then you'd also be doing like maybe some anatomy classes, right? On top of that, you would have anatomy classes. I mean, I was fortunate that I was able to take quite a few classes at a time. And so like I was always taking a head drawing, a figure drawing, a 20-minute class, and like an anatomy class, like every term I was there. And then also I would work in like one extra interesting one, whether it was like a figure invention or I don't know, other stuff like drawing with, you know, regular charcoal or their painterly drawing, I guess, as they call it. And, you know, so I would always take one of each of the core classes and then throw in like one of the the extra ones. Then eventually I was doing painting classes and mixing things up. So you kind of have to train the same way, where it's not just always bringing it up to a finish every time. Sometimes you want to do slightly quicker efforts and see if you can get yourself to do that. Sometimes you got to do, I don't know, just different things. Mix it up. Try some different supplies. Try whatever. Just make it interesting, I guess. Make it fun. Yeah, I don't know. That's my answer. Celsius, I hope that made sense. What I would do personally, and this is kind of what I tell my students too, right? Is like, because people are asking me all the time, like, how do I train? How should I set this up? What should I spend my time doing? And I usually tell them, like, treat it like if you were taking classes at a place like Watts, right? And it's basically like a cross-training approach where you're doing a little bit of everything at once, but in a way where when you're doing that thing, you're like fully focused on it, right? Like you spend your full training time, and then you can kind of like move between things either from day to day or week to week, or, you know, and change things up accordingly, however you want, however you have time for, really, I guess, is kind of what it comes down to. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Anyway, I guess we're done. Because like Isaiah said, thank you. Welcome, Isaiah. The other day, because we always see Isaiah in the live streams, and I have a student named Isaac, and for some reason when I shot the video, I was shooting a critique video, hit start, and I was like, welcome back, Isaiah, and then his name was actually Isaac, and I didn't realize it until I was like editing the video, and then I had to edit it out. I don't know why I told that story, but that's...
Because Isaiah's always here.
Yeah, it threw me off. I know, I thought I was doing an Isaiah critique.
Are you ready to call it?
Yeah, I think we're done.
Awesome.
I think it's dinner time.
Cool.
Also, I didn't drink my Coca-Cola. I have it still sitting here, as you can see, unopened.
Wow.
It's very sad. I was going to drink it. I was like, I grabbed it. I thought, you know what? I want to be just like my hero, Norm Macdonald, who drank Coca-Colas during his live streams. And then I didn't do it.
Oh,
yeah, it was very sad. Bad. Yeah. Next time.
Next time.
Yeah. Cool.
Next time I
anyway.
won't be so nasally either.
Oh yeah, Olivia is actually sick. She got the COVID.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm okay. It wasn't that bad.
It wasn't too bad. She was sick for like a couple days. Now she's getting better.
I just have a even more nasally than usual voice. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Fortunately,
everyone.
I am unaffected. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I will see you guys next week, and we will be back.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Know what we're drawing next week, though.
I think it's gonna be a critique stream.
Oh, so if you guys are still watching, we might do like a critique type stream where I critique people's drawings. So if you want to do a drawing from a piece of reference, that's kind of the key. Again, remember I was talking about how we got to have like a common goal, essentially. So if you have a drawing and a piece of reference to go with it and you send it to me, I will try to include it in the stream. I have no idea how many people are going to send things. Last time we just had a few, but if it's too many, I mean, obviously I can only do so many. But if you want to take your chances and send something to us, then we have like a Discord channel that you can join and submit things. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
Oh, one more comment
okay.
for you. This is from JoJo.
Ah,
JoJo
Joseph.
Says, thanks for everything, my friend. Keep up the great work. Love, your favorite pupil. Aww.
Aw, thanks, Joseph.
Nice.
I appreciate that, definitely. And we've been talking about going on a road trip eventually. And at one point, I was thinking we could stop by and say hi. Because you're far away now, which is unfortunate.
All right.
Yeah.
And Isaiah sent the images on our Discord channel. So he's asking how to send
Oh, yeah, Discord's probably the best way. Like on our Discord channel, to join our Discord, you have to create an account on our website, but you don't have to like buy anything or register for a class or anything. You can just create the account and then log in to like the student dashboard or whatever. And then you just like scroll down and there's like a big Discord logo and you just click on it. And then you're in our Discord channel. That's how that works. And then I think we actually set up a little thing in there that has a place where people can post things to be critiqued if we do a critique live stream. And there's places in there you can ask me questions, and then there's a ton of people that post their drawings and stuff all the time. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, goodbye, everyone.